Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for coming in such large numbers on such a cold evening. It's my privilege to be able to talk about feminist art practices in India, and in a larger sense, what would be in India. Feminism is a term that pops in and out over a period of time, but the larger sort of domain that we like to consider is what we call the women's movement. I think there's no country in the world where the woman's body has been so severely contested as India. It's been a site of contestation, it's been a site of appropriation, and it's been a site of immense subversion. From 1991 to 1996, and I'm going to concentrate on the period of the 90s, I understand that we can go from the 60s upwards, but this is the decade which is absolutely germane to my own practice. I worked on a manuscript that is still unpublished on the woman in Indian art. The woman is the most consistent muse in Indian art, and this would certainly go back to about the 3rd century BC, where representations of women are profound. They're not only seen in statuary, but they're a part of architecture, then they permeate painting, and there is a plethora, absolute glut of the kind of imagery that is available of the woman. She's a part of architectural devices, she's a part of decorative elements, and she is a subject. Now, in classical terms, the divisions of the way you represent women are primarily 3. She's the Nayika, the Devi, and the Ganika. The Nayika being the heroine, which tends to be the central figure of representation. The Ganika being the courtesan or the prostitute, who also accrues to herself a great amount of aesthetic authority and power. And the Devi being the goddess. This was something that I was able to research over a period of 4 or 5 years. And then the contrast between what was on the ground was so profound that it actually resulted in an exhibition of photographs. And we called it Woman/Goddess, to talk about the immense dichotomy. And I was able to access an entire horde of photographs over the last 20 or 30 years that people from sources as diverse as ethnography, anthropology, contemporary practice had been accumulating. And this exhibition then traveled, it got a Ford Foundation grant, and it traveled within India and also to New York. And very close with this was another exhibition I was able to do in the National Gallery of Modern Art, which was called The Self and the World. There is a seminal piece of text in India called The Home and the World by Rabindranath Tagore, which has become a famous film by Satyajit Ray called Ghare Baire, again, Home and the World. And that is definitive of the way certainly women were seen in the 19th century in India. The home, or the Andar Mahal, or the inner courtyard would be the feminine space, the space of nurture, maternity, beauty, privacy, but also what the 19th century scholars of the time come to see as eternal, incontestable, pure, and Indian. And the outer space, the Bahir space, would be masculine, contemporary, Europeanized, commercial, and the one of exchange with the world. So it seemed important that if we were to bring forth an exhibition of women artists, it would be called The Self and the World, the selfing of the woman, the appropriation of her body for herself in a certain sense. And that became something I was able to work on and have been able to return to over a period of time. Now, what was this immense dichotomy that many of us have tried to address? Partha Chatterjee, the eminent historian, calls this the way the woman was featured in India, particularly in the 19th century, as a new and entirely legitimate subordination. This was a subordination to the cause of nation, but also to a subordination to masculinities, patriarchy, and to the cause of the family. And this is what starts to be challenged. We have at least 4 major women's movements in India, historically speaking. The 1820s, Raja Ram Mohan Roy. This is against bride burning, which was a very common practice at that time, particularly among high-class Brahmin families. 1820s. This picks up momentum through the 19th century. Then there is a second rush of a movement around the period of independence, which is led by Mahatma Gandhi and so on. And that is about widow remarriage, child marriage, women's education. Then in the 1970s, this 1970s becomes a seminal period because of its sort of collaboration with Eurocentric feminisms. And then the 1990s, where these strains tend to come together and they make one sort of a cognate. I shouldn't take too much more time. But what I will do from here is try and show you some images and see how these kind of representations take this argument forward. Because this is so complex, because the kind of movements come from different sources, I mean, the 1820s, 1940s, the women who come into the feminist movement in India tend to be sisters, wives, daughters of profoundly powerful men. In the 1970s, these are grassroots movements which come up from the ground. The most powerful of these would be what would be called the Chipko movement. They were women who were not even aware of the terminologies of something like feminism, but there was a massive tree felling program in the hills, and there was devastation of the ecology of an entire region called Uttarakhand. And the women of the region, of the village Remi, for 4 days continuously, when the contractors come to cut the trees which they're able to sell for very high prices, hug the trees. And they say this is, Chipko means embrace, to hug. And in this way, over a period of, well, so many hours, 4 days, they take it in turns to not allow the felling of the trees. And this becomes an extremely powerful movement, and this spreads right across from the hills to the south, and there is an Apiko movement even in Karnataka and South India for the resistance of this kind of, well, economic control of a property. And there are songs, there's an entire movement. The other great movement of the 70s is something called Seva, whereby women were able to appropriate issues like microfinance, small trades. It could be trading in garbage, for instance. It was at very, very small level. But this has also spread and become an enormously powerful movement, and there are today 700,000 women who subscribe to Seva. They are members of Seva, and they are bankrolled by this entire network that is run by women. Now, what has happened is that there has been a synergy between urbanism, education, and an awareness of what would be Eurocentric issues within feminism, and these grassroots kinds of movements which are completely sui generis coming out of the ground within India. And there are bridges, there are also areas of representation. But perhaps I should just show you some images and then move on. The first artist that I'm going to show you is Nalini Malani. Born 1946, she's very much a child of partition. In a certain sense, her family migrates from Pakistan. And there is, as we can see, a huge amount of irony in a work like this. She uses a story by a Pakistani writer and comments on the terrible devastation of Pakistan in this kind of work, which is, the work is a commentary that if there is an exchange of these millions of people between India and Pakistan, it's the largest movement in the world, then what about those who are incarcerated in mental hospitals? Should they also be divided between India and Pakistan? And that is this work. She actually comes out of this and makes a new media a very powerful instrument for her own kind of practice. Nalini Malani locates feminism within India and abroad, because then she starts to address issues of fascism even at a global level. So, for instance, this work, The Hamlet Machine, addresses fascism in Japan, as well as Germany, as well as the rise of the right wing in India. And it's simultaneous sort of video projections. What I'm trying to also suggest is that women in this sphere appropriate what they believe was, what was consigned to the women as being less important, small, domestic, is then appropriated by women and very powerfully projected. One of these areas is, of course, nature and ecology. Here there is the representation of the mythological figure of Radha, taken from the 13th, 14th century Bhagavad Puran. And Radha is, of course, eroticized, as is nature, but then there is a huge amount of play in the kind of representation that she does. Sorry, these images can't go bigger than this. That's a detail. One of Malani's great preoccupations is the ability to be able to span art movements. I think what is at the heart of modern India has been a recovery of folk traditions, small traditions, tribal movements, and women have been very much in the forefront of this. I should make a comment over here that, say, particularly compared to other Asian countries like China, there's a huge number of women artists in India. And this recovery of what was the slowly fading, dying traditions under British academic rule or the process of modernization, that process of recovery, of recuperation is very strong. So in an Nalini Malani work like this, which is, these are painted mylar sheets and they rotate, there would be references to 19th and 20th century early paintings, and it's a sort of a homage to those kinds of painting forms which are no longer extant. That's another image of her work. I think this was at the, one of these works was at the Documenta. Romana Hussain, this is an artist who has a particularly poignant but important interjection, because she stands at the intersection of minority presence, by which of course I mean the Muslim woman. Romana Hussain is deeply affected by the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1993. That's an act of a right-wing aggression against a Muslim shrine which was considered very sacred. It was the burial ground of Babur, the first Mughal emperor, and Romana's practice just changed overnight dramatically. She began to examine, like Shireen Nishat and I suppose Shazia Sikandar later, she began to examine the tropes of Muslim womanhood. And Is It What You Think becomes a very powerful performance, come video work, where she appears as a Muslim woman. Now there is a coincidence in this particular work and the demolition of the mosque and her own bodily condition when she is diagnosed with breast cancer. So in the work she appears as a Muslim woman with the veil, and you see her applying call, etc. And slowly, as she then makes her a more frontal view of the body available, she exposes the body to reveal that there has been a radical mastectomy. And there is this whole, the de-veiling of the body is actually an interrogation of the way attitudes towards seduction, the using of the veil to suggest not only the oriental body, but also the hidden body, the desired body. Very much a trope from cinema as well as poetry is then sort of bust, it's sort of exposed. And she does a series of works before her death, where there is a correlationship between the fruit, the cut fruit, the demolished mosque, and of course the body part, in this case the breast, which has been given over to a diseased condition. Begum Hazrat Mahal, she honors in this work a woman who, a 19th century Muslim freedom fighter who's very much a part of the resistance against the British. Anita Dubey, Delhi-based artist, about 56 years old. In this performative video, she plays the role of a Muslim tailor, Noor Muhammad. And for 15 minutes, she speaks as Noor Muhammad would today, which is, again, marginalized, minority, living within an urban condition, and what does that mean in contemporary India. A lot of Anita Dubey's work uses signifiers in a certain sense. And one of the ones that she's used with great success are the ceramic eyes. The ceramic eyes are sort of put onto the body of a divinity, perhaps in a temple. When you are consecrating a temple, the last moment you put the eyes, and that's when the divine in the temple as an icon is supposed to assume life. And of course, she removes the eyes, but then places them on different parts of her own body, as well as in architectural spaces. Like this. Here, of course, to suggest a femininity, but within an architectural space. Elements of disease as well. Shiba Chachi represents an entirely different kind of marginalization, and this would be the marginalization of the body of the one that will forsake, the renunciate. And there is a sort of a double feminization over here, even though the body appears to be that of the androgyne, because this is a series of works that she does more or less in collaboration, but it's because she's privy to it. Otherwise, these are not acts that would be so public. But on the banks of the Ganga at particular time, of the river Ganga at particular times, there can be a change of identity, because you renounce your worldly identity and assume that of the renunciate. And this is another kind of feminization of reinvesting yourself with a different kind of an authority because of the change of identity. And this is possible on the banks of the river, which is, of course, considered a divine feminine. I'll rush through these because I'm probably at the end of my 10 minutes. Pushpamala, she does a lot of performative work, mainly appearing through she places her own body at the heart of series like Native Women of South India, etc., and then plays out these kinds of narratives where she is here, as in this case, a colonial subordinate of the British rule being measured as an ethnographic subject. Her face would be measured as here. So this is the ethnographic project that the British engaged in, whereby different racial types in India were classified. And this kind of classification was undertaken under these rather extreme conditions. Here she's also playing the goddess as a calendar art object. Sonia Khurana, who uses her body, of course, to challenge the Naomi Wolf kind of beauty myth. It's a sense of extremity. She places herself in the video work called Bird, tries to fly off the box, and every single time she tries, she falls flat, but then tries again. And her entire body, she fetishizes her own body in the attempt to displace the notion of to displace the gaze, to displace the expectation of the gaze when looking at her body. In this work, Closet, there is this constant manic, repetitive changing of clothes until there is absolutely no satisfaction derived from the process. Also, of course, racialization of the touch. Bharti Kher. Kher returns from England to come and work in India, and there is an investigation in a lot of her work of the pressures of the domestic. We see this in her representations of the sculptures, etc. And she creates a type which is bestialized, because the body is, of course, broken, and then there is a hoof attached instead of the human leg. But in every case, she's here racialized, she's subordinated, she's sexualized. So this is, and we see the domestic as here as represented by the wallpaper. Some more details. Mrs. Hera Moon. This is an interesting work. Apparently, Leonardo makes only 4 portraits of women, and one of them is called The Lady with Ermine. But this is her representation, the teacups on the head. And what is interesting about Bharti Kher is that these are all live body casts. They're all taken from subjects that she has sought these particular bodies, taken these live casts, and then immobilized or frozen them in these sculptural forms. Shilpa Gupta. Shilpa Gupta's work tends to be highly political. Blame is simulations of bottles of blood. In a performance, she sells these bottles of blood which blame the other community, either Hindu or Muslim, for acts of rioting or for violence in the city. Bars of soap, which she presents as the work Threat. This, as you can see, the work is highly performative. The need to assume the role of various typologies. And this is the last artist, Tejal Shah. Tejal Shah likes to perform the sort of the cusp of the masculine and the feminine, and to challenge the viewer in a certain sense by the notion of this performativity. Even as she claims more and more space for the feminized. Here, this is a project that she did with the transgendered community, where she invited them to fantasize, what would you like to be? And this is the outcome, that that there is this strong influence of the cinematic, popular, Bollywood. These are the two works which are with the transgendered community. That's Shah herself. This is the final work. This is a work that she did in the last Documenta series, creating a mythologized feminine type of an archaic order, whereby, but there is an entire control over the natural environment. I think I'll end here. I've sort of probably can feel myself getting all hot and bothered. Is it more than 10 minutes? But thank you all for your attention. Thank you.